So, every time you try to persuade someone, right? Whether it's asking your boss for a raise or maybe pitching venture capitalists or honestly just trying to get your partner to agree to a new budget.
Right, the everyday stuff.
Exactly. Every single time, your audience's brain is basically actively looking for an excuse to just, tune you out.
Oh, absolutely. It's just human nature.
Yeah. And chances are the way you were taught to present your ideas is actually like helping them do it. We tend to operate under this assumption that if we just lay out all the logical facts in a neat little row, the other person will just naturally arrive at our conclusion.
Which is, I mean, it's a nice thought, but human cognition just doesn't work like a spreadsheet.
Right.
When you're trying to communicate an idea, you are dealing with, biological filters, incredibly limited attention spans, and just deeply ingrained cognitive biases.
It's a lot to overcome.
It really is.
Yeah.
Persuasion isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or relying on some innate extroverted charisma. It's fundamentally about understanding the architecture of how the brain processes and accepts new information.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are going to decode a guide that actually bypasses those cognitive filters. We're looking at a framework straight out of Stanford Business School, authored by Francis Flynn, and it's called Crafting a Compelling Message.
It's a fantastic piece of work.
It really is. And what makes this document so powerful is that it treats persuasion not as this mystical art form, but as a mechanical process.
Yes, exactly.
It's a highly practical blueprint designed for a broad audience. You don't need a theater degree. You don't need a background in debate to actually use this stuff.
And I think the real beauty of Friend's approach is its universal application. I mean, the exact same psychological principles that secure millions in corporate funding, they apply just as effectively to a casual, kitchen table negotiation.
Right, because it's just about human brains.
Exactly. By shifting your focus away from your own anxiety and onto the actual structural mechanics of your message, you completely remove the mystery from public speaking.
So let's actually look at the very first step of that mechanics process. Because, we usually think the first step of building a presentation is opening up a slide deck and just dumping all our ideas onto the screen.
The dreaded data dump.
Right. But Flynn argues the actual first step is aggressive subtraction. He calls it singular focus. And I know, just from personal experience, when I spend weeks researching a topic, my immediate instinct is to just show you my entire mental hard drive to prove I did the work.
Oh, we all do that. It's the classic curse of knowledge. You understand all the intricate details, so you mistakenly assume those details are strictly required for baseline comprehension.
Right. You think everyone needs the full backstory.
But they don't. The human brain's working memory is notoriously limited. If you present, say, 5 equally weighted arguments to an audience, they don't remember all 5.
You just get overwhelmed.
Exactly. They experience cognitive overload, the brain's processing speed crashes, and they end up remembering absolutely none of them.
Wow. None of them.
0. So Flynn advises this laser-like focus on a single overarching key takeaway.
So it's less like packing a suitcase for a trip where you just cram everything in just in case, and more like designing a load-bearing wall for a building.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because if you try to support the roof with 20 flimsy, kind of disjointed sticks of data, the entire structure just collapses under its own weight.
Right.
You need one massive steel beam, that singular focus, and every other piece of information, every anecdote, every statistic, it must exist solely to reinforce that single beam.
And that structural analogy hits on exactly why editing is so vital. But once you have established that singular steel beam, you have to actually anchor it in the listener's mind.
Okay, how do we do that?
Well, the text introduces a concept called dichotomizing, which essentially means you must always present your idea in direct contrast to an alternative. Yeah, the underlying psychology here is that our brains are remarkably poor at evaluating absolute values in a vacuum.
Oh, like in behavioral economics. If I tell you a new software package costs $1,000, you have literally no idea if that's a good deal or a total ripoff until I tell you the industry standard is $5,000.
Exactly. The brain desperately needs a reference point to calculate value. Mechanically, our neural pathways rely on that contrast to assign meaning. I mean, we only understand the concept of hot because we have a biological reference for cold.
That makes total sense. So in persuasion, what's the most common reference point we should be using?
The most critical reference point you will ever use is the status quo.
The way things are right now.
Right. Even if the alternative to your proposal is simply doing nothing, You must explicitly contrast your new idea against the baseline of current inaction.
So you have to articulate the invisible cost of doing nothing. You don't just say, my new workflow is efficient. You have to say, this workflow saves 10 hours a week compared to our current manual system.
Precisely. Or saying, this material is 50% more durable than the industry standard. Without that dichotomy, the listener's brain just has no scaffolding to hang your idea on.
Okay, so if our brains require that structural contrast to even assign value, how do we push the audience from merely understanding the value to actually believing it?
Ah, that's the leap.
Right. That leap from comprehension to conviction, it requires proof. And Flynn points out this massive blind spot that most communicators have. He says people intuitively know that demonstrations are incredibly persuasive, yet speakers routinely leave them out of their presentations.
They do. All the time.
Wait, really? But why? If we know they work, why do we skip them? I mean, are people just afraid the demo will fail live on stage?
That's a huge part of it. The hesitation often stems from fear. Speakers worry about a live failure. We've all seen instances where, a product demo fails embarrassingly on stage.
Oh yeah, those are painful to watch.
Very painful. But this raises an important point about what Flynn actually means by a demonstration. It doesn't require this high-wire circus act or some dramatic Steve Jobs reveal.
Okay, that's a relief.
Yeah, the guide offers a really profound, low-risk directive. It says, do not just tell the audience your final conclusion. Instead, provide the exact same demonstrative evidence that converted you to that conclusion in the first place.
Oh, wow. That completely shifts the paradigm of what a demo even has to be. It's not about manufacturing a stunt for the stage. It's about auditing your own journey of discovery.
Exactly. Think about it.
Yeah, because at some point you were likely a skeptic about your own idea, or at least totally uninformed, right?
Right, you started at 0 too.
And then you saw a specific user struggle with a product, or maybe you ran a small beta test, and that specific real-world moment flipped the switch in your brain.
That was your conversion moment. And by recreating that specific realization for your audience, you aren't just preaching a conclusion at them. You are inviting them to experience the exact same intellectual epiphany.
That is so powerful. But to make sure that epiphany actually sticks, here's where it gets really interesting. Flynn pairs the concept of demonstration with a strategy called multiple modalities.
Yes.
Because we've always been taught that repetition is the key to memory, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them.
The old classic advice.
Yeah, but the text actually argues that simply repeating the same phrasing over and over is a terrible strategy.
It really is. Repetition without variation triggers a neurological defense mechanism called habituation.
Habituation.
Yeah, the brain actively tunes out constant, unchanging stimuli just to conserve energy. Think of like a buzzing refrigerator in your kitchen.
Oh, sure.
Your auditory cortex registers the noise when you first walk in, but after 10 minutes, you literally stop hearing it.
It just becomes white noise.
Exactly. So if you repeat the same sentence 3 times in a pitch, your audience's cognitive filters classify you as background noise.
Wow, so you're just talking to a wall at that point. So to bypass that habituation, this multiple modalities thing keeps the core message identical but constantly changes the delivery vehicle.
That's it?
So you are attacking that singular focus from totally different angles. First, you state the thesis verbally. Then maybe you show a stark data visualization.
Right.
After that, you share a brief emotional case study about a customer. And then finally, you offer a physical demonstration.
By changing the format, you are engaging entirely different neural pathways. Auditory, visual, emotional, spatial. This creates a much richer, more interconnected memory trace in the brain.
Because it feels new every time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The novelty of the changing formats keeps the brain's attention centers fully engaged, while the consistency of the underlying message constantly reinforces the conclusion.
I love that. But that need for continuous novelty and visual engagement, it completely upends how most of us approach the visual aids in our presentations.
Oh, absolutely.
If the brain requires varied stimuli to stay alert, the standard corporate slide deck, 30 slides packed with dense, identical bullet points, it's essentially a recipe for inducing a coma.
It is brutal.
Right.
And the Stanford Guide is wonderfully ruthless about slide design.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, bad visual aids don't just bore an audience. They actively sabotage the brain's ability to comprehend the speaker. Flynn introduces a highly actionable metric here, which is the 2-minute rule.
2 minutes.
If it takes you longer than 2 minutes to explain the contents of a single slide, That slide contains way too much information.
Mhm.
You are overloading the working memory of your audience. You just have to break that information up across multiple, simpler slides.
I have definitely sat through meetings where a presenter leaves a microscopic, just tangled flowchart on the screen for 15 minutes while they talk about 5 totally tangential topics.
It's the worst.
The disconnect is agonizing. And Flynn warns specifically about this exact scenario. He says, do not leave an old slide visible once you've moved on to a new point.
Yes, because this is where presenters run into the split attention effect. The human brain simply cannot simultaneously process spoken complex information and read unrelated text.
We think we can multitask.
We love to think we can multitask, but neurologically, we are just rapidly task switching, which severely degrades our comprehension of both inputs. So if you're talking about next year's projections, while the audience is staring at a slide detailing last year's budget, cognitive overload sets in.
It's like trying to have a heartfelt, really serious conversation with a friend at a sports bar while a high-stakes game is playing on a TV directly behind their head.
That is the perfect analogy.
The visual distraction almost always wins. You can't fight the TV, but the text offers a simple fix for this, right? Just put up a blank slide, fade the screen to black.
Yes, reclaim their visual attention so they have literally no choice but to refocus on your voice.
So visual control is paramount, obviously. But the guide also addresses vocal and tonal control, particularly the use of humor. Because I feel like a lot of presenters feel this intense pressure to open with a joke to break the ice and seem relatable.
They do. People always default to the classic, a priest and a venture capitalist walk into a bar kind of setup.
Right, which almost always falls totally flat in a professional setting.
It really does. Because stand-up comedy relies on a very specific cadence, the buildup of tension, and the sudden subversion of expectation. It's an art form. The text strongly advises against acting like a comedian.
So no stand-up routines.
No stand-up.
Yeah.
Instead, it suggests incorporating humor naturally, exactly as you would in a regular conversation with a colleague. Share a relevant story that naturally has a lighthearted element, but never mock your own premise or undermine your authority just for a cheap laugh.
That takes a lot of the performative pressure off, honestly.
Yeah.
And speaking of relieving pressure, Flynn's advice on script preparation is going to save anyone who dreads public speaking a lot of sleepless nights.
It is a lifesaver.
The guide actively advises against memorizing your speech word for word.
Rote memorization is a massive psychological trap.
Really? Why is that? I would think memorizing it makes you safer.
You'd think so, but when you memorize a script, you are storing it in your brain sequentially.
Like a chain.
Exactly. So if you are 10 minutes into a presentation and you drop a single transition word, the entire sequence breaks.
Oh, no.
The brain recognizes the missing link, the threat response triggers adrenaline spikes, cortisol floods your system, and you completely freeze.
Because at that point, you aren't speaking to a concept you deeply understand anymore. You are just desperately trying to access a rigid, locked file in your memory.
Exactly.
I've watched presenters freeze up on stage like that, and it is agonizing for everyone in the room. You just feel so bad for them. So to avoid that panic response, Flynn suggests you should only memorize the introduction and the conclusion. Just the bookends of the presentation.
Right, there, because starting strong suppresses that initial spike of anxiety, which proves to yourself that you belong up there.
And finishing strong.
Finishing strong capitalizes on a psychological principle called the peak end rule, where the audience disproportionately remembers the final moments of an experience over the middle.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
So for the vast majority of the presentation, the middle part, you should just internalize your key conceptual waypoints.
So you practice the flow of ideas, not the actual syllables.
Exactly.
The text actually recommends practicing at least 3 times, and ideally doing it at least once with a friendly audience member, like a colleague who will just listen and nod, not someone who will aggressively critique your hand gestures.
Right. You are building muscle memory for the conceptual journey, not a theatrical performance.
Okay, so you've built the architecture, you know your bookends, and now it's time to actually physically deliver the message, which is the moment where the physical symptoms of anxiety usually peak for people.
Oh, absolutely. But Flynn points out a fascinating misconception we all share here. We vastly overestimate how much our physical stage presence actually matters compared to the substance of our message.
Really? Because we obsess over where to put our hands, whether we are pacing too much, or if our posture is perfectly straight.
We do, but the research indicates that if your structure and your singular focus are dialed in, the audience is remarkably forgiving of awkward physical mechanics.
That's so good to hear.
That said, the text does highlight that the most impactful physical tool you possess is simply making eye contact.
Eye contact, just looking at people.
Yes, because eye contact shifts the dynamic of the room from a formal, one-way performance to an actual human exchange. When you look an audience member in the eye, you activate mirror neurons.
Wow.
You aren't just broadcasting data anymore. You are establishing a connection which naturally increases their receptivity to your message. Furthermore, audiences read your facial expressions just as much as they listen to your words to gauge the emotional weight and sincerity of the data.
So they're looking at your face to see if you actually believe what you're saying.
Exactly.
Now, to manage the room itself, the guide offers 3 functional directives. It says to speak slowly, enunciate clearly, and set your baseline volume to reach the person sitting the furthest away from you.
Which is crucial, because if the person in the back row has to strain to hear you, they will simply stop trying.
They'll just tune out.
Right. And the energy in the back of the room dies. And that apathy operates like a virus, eventually creeping forward to the front rows. Projecting your voice doesn't just ensure audibility, it subconsciously signals authority and confidence to the entire room.
But projecting confidence when your heart is beating out of your chest, I mean, that is the real challenge, right?
It is.
The guide's approach to nervous energy is a total paradigm shift. It says, do not psych yourself out. It reminds us that the audience actually expects you to be a bit nervous. They're not judging you for it. So instead of trying to suppress the adrenaline, which I guess is biologically impossible once it's in your bloodstream, Flynn suggests relabeling it.
Yes. In psychology, this concept is known as arousal congruency.
Arousal congruency.
Right. The physiological sensations of anxiety and excitement are nearly identical in the human body. Your heart rate elevates, your breathing becomes shallow, and your palms sweat. The difference is entirely cognitive. It's just how your brain interprets those physiological signals.
Wait, so if you tell your brain, I am terrified, it triggers a flight response and you physically shrink. But if you tell yourself, I am incredibly enthusiastic and fired up to share this idea, you harness that exact same adrenaline to project outward energy.
That is exactly how it works. You literally relabel the nerves as enthusiasm. The first 2 minutes might still feel a bit rocky, but once you get past that memorized introduction, you usually settle into a rhythm.
That is amazing.
However, no matter how well you prepare, you will eventually stumble.
Oh, for sure.
You'll skip a slide, drop a vital statistic, or, mispronounce a key term. And this is where Flynn delivers a golden rule that is incredibly counterintuitive for most polite people.
Let me guess. Do not apologize.
Never apologize for a minor stumble.
It's so hard, though, because my immediate reflex, if I click the wrong button on a remote, is to say, oh, I'm so sorry about that, let me go back. It just feels like the polite, professional thing to do.
It is polite, but it's deeply detrimental to persuasion. When you apologize or make offhand comments about your own nervousness, you act as an attentional spotlight.
Oh, I see.
The audience likely didn't even notice the dropped word or the slight hesitation.
Yeah.
But the moment you apologize for it, you literally force their brain to focus on the flaw instead of the message.
It's the Streisand effect in presentation form.
Exactly.
By trying to smooth over a tiny mistake, you draw a massive neon circle around it. Now, obviously, if the mistake is impossible to ignore, like, say, the projector literally dies in the middle of your pitch, you have to acknowledge it.
Right, you can't ignore that.
The text says to use a bit of conversational humor, acknowledge the reality of the room, and just confidently keep moving. Because maintaining control of the narrative shows resilience, but apologizing for every tiny slip just shows insecurity. Well, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, unpacking the invisible mechanics of how human beings actually process, evaluate, and accept new ideas. We've learned that crafting a compelling message isn't about adding more data. It actually requires aggressive subtraction to find your singular focus.
And you must contrast that focus against the status quo, because the brain demands a reference point to calculate value.
Right. We explored how to bypass the brain's habituation filters by using multiple modalities, so changing the delivery vehicle while keeping the core message intact.
We also discussed the critical importance of slide design, managing cognitive load with the 2-minute rule and avoiding the split attention effect by simply fading to a blank screen when you want the audience to listen.
And we learned to ditch rote memorization to avoid the dreaded panic freeze, to harness arousal congruency by relabeling our nerves as enthusiasm, and to never, ever spotlight our own minor mistakes with an apology.
It's a really comprehensive toolkit, But, perhaps the most transformative insight in this entire Stanford guide is how we think about proof.
Yeah.
The text advises us to recreate the exact demonstrative evidence that converted us. So the next time you are trying to win someone over, whether it's a skeptical department head, a hesitant client, or just a friend who needs convincing, pause before you open your mouth. Ask yourself, what actually convinced me in the first place?
Because 9 times out of 10, it wasn't a dense spreadsheet or a perfectly formatted bulleted list. It was a visceral, real-world realization. A moment of deep frustration with a broken system, a specific human experience, or a sudden aha moment when looking at a raw piece of data.
Exactly. How can you recreate that raw, authentic moment of discovery for your audience? If you can take them on the exact same intellectual journey you went on, you don't have to push them toward your conclusion. They will arrive there completely on their own.
That is such a great point to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Now get out there and start crafting your next compelling message.